Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So it's that time of the year again. Yes, we have reached, or rather surpassed, the halfway point of the year, and I am so excited to be bringing you guys this video. I started the halfway through series last year in 2022, back when the title of this series rhymed. But now, unfortunately, with 2023 it doesn't rhyme, but that doesn't mean that we can't still have a great time going through the new releases of the year so far. We are going to be diving into the good, the bad, and the mid, all of the stuff that I watched this year, and I can't wait to dive into my thoughts, feelings, reactions to all of them, as well as, of course, hearing you guys' thoughts down in the comments below. Now, for today's video, we are going to be diving exclusively into the films of the year so far. So I'm going to be talking about all of the movies that I've gotten a chance to check out, and I have been trying to do some catching up in the last couple of weeks, so we have quite a few to get through. But for the ones that I already have reviews of, I'm not going to be diving into them in as much detail. It'll mostly just be mentioning which category they fall under. So we're going to have a good time here. But before we dive into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. As you're watching this, it's currently Barbenheimer week. It's currently Barbenheimer. To say that I'm excited for Barbenheimer would be an understatement. Like, this is the week I've been waiting for the last 7 months. This is what 2023 has been all about, in my opinion, okay? So I am super excited for Barbenheimer, but I wanted to make sure to get this video out before Barbenheimer, because Barbenheimer really does represent the latter half of 2023 in my mind, and we can't include it in this ranking because otherwise things will get derailed. Okay, Barbenheimer is gonna have to wait until the end of the year in the Genie Awards to see how it falls for the overall releases of 2023. Until then, we have plenty of 2023 releases to get through, so let's get started. Starting us off with the good of the year so far. So the first films that I'm going to be mentioning in the good category are the ones that I've already done reviews of. First off, we have Creed 3. Now, this was a phenomenal entry into the Rocky/Creed franchise. The first film that was directed by Michael B. Jordan, and it was in fact his directorial debut, and he absolutely knocked it out of the park. I think Creed 3 was such a bright light in the early part of 2023 when it came to theatrical releases, and it's a shame that it has been tainted by the drama, the scandal, okay, the criminal scandal surrounding Jonathan Majors. And it's crazy when you think about how far he fell, because like earlier this year it was him and Pedro Pascal. Like, those two men, okay, ruled Hollywood in like February, March time. So it's crazy to think how far he's kind of fallen since then because of these criminal charges. But aside from that, Creed 3 was such, like I said, a bright light in the early part of the year. It was brilliantly executed. The story was there, the action was there, and Michael B. Jordan was able to introduce new ways of depicting the boxing sequences and making it more visceral and engaging. And he just, like I said, knocked it out of the park when it came to the execution. Another film that completely knocked it out of the park, in my opinion, and one which not enough people saw, okay, is Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Dungeons and Dragons was so freaking good, and I've seen it several times since, guys. I have rewatched this film, which is so rare for me. Do you understand how rare it is for me to rewatch a film in this day and age, where I feel like if I'm not watching a new thing, I'm missing out? But I went back and rewatched Dungeons and Dragons, and I told everyone that would listen that this film was good. It was a very well executed blockbuster movie, and honestly, it shocks me and it saddens me to see how poorly it did, but maybe by some miracle it will do really well on VOD and streaming, and then they'll greenlight a sequel anyways, despite its box office failures. I don't know if that's gonna happen. I don't know if Paramount is gonna take the risk, but it's just such a shame because the film itself was so brilliantly executed. I absolutely loved the cast. The dynamic of the team was great. The world building that they did was really good as well, introducing introducing the Dungeons and Dragons lore into this blockbuster movie without making it seem too convoluted and too exclusionary. I think it was the perfect balance, although I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons fan myself, so you know, fans may have a different perspective, but I do believe that they enjoyed this film as well. And also it was just genuinely funny and very well executed in terms of the comedy and the action, and not to mention the special effects and CG were crisp. They were good. Okay, and we are gonna talk about bad CG, okay, because this year had some clunkers, but Dungeons and Dragons wasn't one of them. Dungeons and Dragons visually looked good. That's impressive. And so, like I say, I'm heartbroken at the box office failure that it ended up being, but that is not on the film at all. That's on Paramount for the poor timing of the release, it being sandwiched among so many other films like Creed 3 and John Wick and everything, and also perhaps the advertising and not really preparing people to get excited for watching a Dungeons and Dragons film. You know, there's so many reasons why this floundered, and I blame them all on Paramount, because the creative team and the cast and crew absolutely knocked it out of the park. And speaking of John Wick, we also of course had the 4th installment in the John Wick saga, or the John Wick franchise, with John Wick Chapter 4. And this franchise has been so impressive because it's just been so consistently brilliant. And I've really been in awe of that consistency, you know, and they're able to top themselves each time, giving us these bombastic action sequences that are so crisply executed and really leave you on the edge of your seat, that I've just been impressed, you know, all the time. I think the weak points when it comes to the John Wick films is definitely the story. I don't think the story is, you know, particularly strong, especially as we get further and further away from John Wick's origin story that was established in the first film. We start to lose sight a little bit of what the point of all of this is. But at the end of the day, Keanu Reeves is so charismatic and so iconic at this point in the role that he really is able to carry the whole franchise on his capable shoulders. And not to mention his co-stars as well are also able to support really well. So the world never feels boring. It's just that perhaps there's less sort of, you know, complexity and interest in the story itself, and it's mostly focused on the action sequences. And sometimes that feels like it's not quite enough to sustain, you know, my attention for the full runtime of the film, especially when it comes to this more recent entry, where I felt like the beginning and the end were particularly strong, but it kind of lost me in the middle. Another movie I checked out earlier this year was a smaller film, nowhere near as big as these major blockbusters, but it also had a really great impact on me, and that was Rye Lane. This is a rom-com set in London that starred 2 black characters, and it's all about them, you know, coming together when one of the characters in particular is going through a rough time, a rough breakup, and they, you know, fall in love. And it's a very predictable rom-com in terms of the, you know, key notes that it hits, but the execution again is really, really well done because of its depiction of South London, using the creative ways to explore the city and this particular part of the city that doesn't really get a lot of attention in the media, as well as highlighting the Afro-Caribbean community in that part of the city, and giving us just a different perspective on what a British love story can look like in this modern age. So I don't want to reveal too much about Rye Lane because, like I said, it's pretty standard as a rom-com, so me saying too much would be a massive spoiler. But I do highly recommend you check it out. I think it was released on Hulu in the US and elsewhere, so it's probably on Disney Plus. It is on Disney Plus in the UK as well. So yeah, definitely check it out. I would highly recommend it. It's definitely one of the bright spots of the year so far, especially because it is a smaller film. And lastly, speaking of smaller films that were bright spots in the year, we also had Amazon Prime's Air, which was directed by Ben Affleck, and this was a delight as well. I really enjoyed this film from start to finish. published. This was the exploration of how the Air Jordan line came to be, and you know, the state that Nike was at the time, and how they lacked a consumer base that was interested in their basketball products, and how that kind of changed around with this huge deal with Michael Jordan that was aided by his mother Dolores. That was a really fascinating story that I think Ben Affleck did a great job in depicting. It's very small, there's nothing overly convoluted or, you know, major about it. Most of it takes place in like the Nike offices in the I think like 80s, early 80s, but I think all of the performances are incredibly solid, especially of course Viola Davis, come on now. Viola Davis, who portrays Dolores Jordan, but also, okay, special shout out to Chris Messina, who plays Michael Jordan's agent at the time. He was brilliant. He was so freaking funny. He was so hilarious. So yeah, there were really great performances in this film, and it was mostly focused on the characters as well as seeing the beginnings of what would become a huge brand that's recognized across the globe. It was a really concise telling of that story. The only shortcomings that I did point out in my previous review was that I wish we could have seen more about the impact of Air Jordan on the culture, on cultures all around the world, but especially, you know, Black American cultures, Black British cultures, like Black people. I wish we could have seen more about this, but it kind of, you know, ends on a really sudden note, and yeah, it feels like it ends just as things were getting especially juicy, which is a shame. Okay, so continuing on with the great releases that we've gotten so far in 2023, and also continuing on with the films that I've already reviewed on the channel, next up we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Excellent. Excellent, brilliant, talent, amazing, wonderful, fantastic. Like, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Listen. James Gunn did the thing, actually. He did the thing. Like, he did what needed to be done. The film was good. Okay, and once again, I rewatched it. I went back and rewatched it because, first of all, the first time around, I was crying half the time. Please. I ended up crying in the middle of my review. Like, it's really that deep, okay? So I had to rewatch it just to see what was going on. But the second time around, still, I was emotional. But I really came to appreciate the little bits and pieces that I had missed the first time around. And really, what it comes down to is, you know, firstly, James Gunn giving these characters a beautiful send-off. And if we don't end up seeing them again ever, or maybe in like a few years, then at least we know that they've gotten this, you know, wonderful final story together, and we can really appreciate the team dynamics that we came to know and love, and also how far some of these characters have gone from their first appearances in the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, in particular Nebula, Rocket. Like, some of these characters have gone through amazing arcs, truly some of the best arcs in the whole of the MCU, and it was wonderful to see James Gunn be able to round those out in this third installment. But also, there was this like warm, fuzzy feeling of returning to the world of the Guardians of the Galaxy, because it's one of the final sort of franchises within the MCU that really do harken back to like 10 years ago, where the MCU was in that particular sort of phase. I mean, it was phase 2, right? But it was in its bag. Like, it was a different flavor of MCU that we had 10 years ago. You know, in the same year that we got Captain America the Winter Soldier, we got the first Guardians film, and there was something really nostalgic about going back to this gang, even though, again, 10 years in the grand scheme of things isn't that long, but in the MCU timeline it is actually pretty long, and it was a really special moment to be able to experience the final chapter of this story that's been 10 years in the making. Okay, so speaking of greatness, speaking of excellent, like, greatness, like, we're talking excellent, we're talking top tier. If you want to talk about top tier of what has been released so far in 2023, we can't even begin the discussion without mentioning Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So listen, I'm gonna be so honest, and this isn't even a ranking video, but Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse might be top 2. And it's not number 2. It's not number 2. Oh, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I mean, I already have a whole video talking about it. I have videos on all of this. I don't know why I'm taking so long talking about these films. I think a lot of the joy and happiness that I have towards Spider-Verse comes from the fact that I'm relieved almost. Like, I'm actually relieved that they were able to do it. Like, they were able to follow through on the first film, which was already one of the best animated films of the last few decades, right? Like, let's be real, it was brilliant. But not only were they able to meet those expectations, they exceeded they exceeded the already very high mark. And so I'm just left here smiling from ear to ear because I'm an appreciator of brilliance, and that's exactly what this sequel was. It was brilliant. It was amazing. It's, yeah, like I said, top 2, and it ain't number 2. I'm just saying. And finally, when it comes to the films that I've already reviewed that were also brilliant, we have The Little Mermaid. People tried to look me dead in my eyes and tell me that this film was bad. I couldn't do anything but laugh. I couldn't do anything but laugh in their faces. This film was brilliant. Again, I watched it twice in the cinemas. Like, honestly, I think it has been that kind of year where I just want to go back and rewatch films that I really enjoy. And thankfully, there are several of them on this list that I did check out several times in the cinemas. Little Mermaid was one of them, yeah. I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to Ariel and Prince Eric. Like, I was tired of the real world. I was like, let me go back to the ocean. It was just phenomenal. Halle Bailey knocked it out of the park. Despite all of the hate, despite all of the racism that she faced, she just delivered so spectacularly on this performance. So yeah, I can't be anything but delighted that I got a chance to see it on the big screen. It rendered me to tears. Like, I was living my life. It was beautiful. So all of the hate and the, you know, horrible things aside, I'm really happy that it exists, and I'm really happy that it's as brilliant as it is. Okay, so now we're going to go through some of the great films that I've gotten a chance to check out so far this year, but haven't had the chance to review on my channel. And first one up we have is Tetris. This was the Apple TV Plus movie starring Taron Egerton, and this was about the creation of the game as well as the distribution of the game globally, especially because it was created in the Soviet Union, where, you know, capitalistic activities were heavily monitored and discouraged. And so here we have Taron Egerton's character who tries to buy the rights to distribute the game in certain territories, but there's all sorts of, you know, legal, sort of economic issues that he goes through. And then halfway through the film, it becomes like a spy thriller because he has to go to the Soviet Union to negotiate with the government. Again, because this is a capitalistic venture, and so they have their paws all over it. And yeah, I think it was a really fascinating story. I had no idea that Tetris went through so much. Okay, I'm a huge fan of the game. I have it on my phone, and when I start playing it, I can play it for hours. Like, it's it's so addictive, and I'm actually very good at it. But I would say that the film itself did a really good job, especially in the first half, of setting up, you know, the creation of the game and also the environment in which it was created, you know, under Soviet rule, where this person who was a coder, you know, he created something that should have been his intellectual property, but instead he had no real ownership of it because he couldn't under this like communist regime. And so it does dive into the implications of that, you know, the fact that you have lent your ideas to something, this has come from your mind, but you forfeit any control over it or the ability to profit over it because of this communist regime. So that was a really interesting exploration of something that you wouldn't even think too deeply about. My one critique would be the second half of the film kind of felt a little bit more muddled than the first. I feel like it did a really great job of setting up the premise and the stakes, and then when we got to Russia, it kind of, like I said, became more of a spy thriller. And whilst at times that was exciting, a lot of the time it just felt a bit muddled in tone. It became very serious very very quickly, which felt like a huge tonal shift in comparison to the first half of the film. But still, I think Taron Egerton gave a great performance in the film, and between this and Blackbird, he seems to have developed a pretty good relationship with Apple TV Plus. So let's see what he comes up with in the future. But in the meantime, I would say that Tetris was definitely a win for the year so far. It's interesting because Tetris kind of falls under the same umbrella as Air, where it's, you know, an exploration of the business dealings behind something that has become very innocuous in pop culture and in our lives. So, you know, like the game Tetris or Air Jordans, or the next thing, okay, which I saw a film about, and that is Blackberry. Blackberry, yes, okay, the triplets of Air, Tetris and Blackberry. I did a really great job of exploring this kind of subgenre of business dealings gone wrong, and I would say that Blackberry may just be my favorite of the three. I don't know, it might be tied between Air and Blackberry, but Blackberry Blackberry is a phenomenal film. Okay, it dives into the creation of the Blackberry in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it also dives into its subsequent success, like how huge it was as a phone in the early 2000s before, of course, its awful annihilation in like the 2007 to 2010 era. Like, oh, what a shocking demise. Now this movie stars Jay Baruchel as Mike Lazaridis, who was one of the creators and founders of the BlackBerry company, or rather the company that existed before it that actually created the phone, and he was a really passionate sort of IT engineer, and there's one scene at the beginning of the film where he goes to this like IT company that could potentially give them a huge contract and inject some more money into their company, and he's sitting in the office with his like left-hand man, and he's waiting to be interviewed, and in the office there's a machine that just has this annoying buzzing sound, and he's looking around the room like, oh, what's making that buzzing sound? And it ends up being, I think it's like the phone or like the voicemail receiver thing. It's like the 90s, so I don't know the apparatus, okay, but it's like the voicemail box machine, whatever, and he just starts taking it apart with a screwdriver that he just has in his pocket, and starts fiddling around with the wires, and then when he's done, the machine doesn't make any noise anymore. So that's just showing how passionate he was about engineering and about creating good quality products, because at a time all of the BlackBerry phones were made in Canada, which I didn't even realize. That's crazy. But I thought of this the other day, or rather a few weeks back, when the UK was having a heat wave. Oh, dying. Okay, and I had a fan in the living room as I was working from home, and I would turn that fan on and off again, depending on, you know, how cool it got. And when it was off when it was off, there was this incessant buzzing noise. Okay, it just made me think of this film, because in that film Mike says that, you know, these kind of noises and glitches and stuff that don't really affect the sort of performance of the product, but reflect the time and dedication and perhaps quality of materials that have been dedicated to create that product. And obviously that quality and time, etc., is going to decrease if you export, you know, the manufacturing to places like China. And so that was a big sticking point with him, is making sure that all of the BlackBerry products were produced in Canada, as opposed to exporting that service. But in the end, they fell, you know, victim to what a lot of global companies have had to do now, which is exporting the manufacturing services to China, and as a result the products suffered for it. So you have that end scene which actually really struck a chord with me, where Mike is just going through this like failed BlackBerry phone that had a ton of glitches, but he receives a box and he's just going through each and every one of them, trying to fix it with his little screwdriver, and you can just tell like how far his company has fallen and how he kind of lost his way because of how competitive you have to be in the global market. Now that's all well and good. Already I was excited, already I was engaged, already I was relating to the material, but that's not even taking into account Glenn Howerton. To say Glenn Howerton stole the show would be an understatement. Glenn Howerton in this film is so top notch. He portrays Jim Balsley, who was the guy that was working for another tech company that ended up working with the BlackBerry team before they were called BlackBerry. And then, he, marketed them. He changed up the company entirely and was able to sell BlackBerry as an idea as well as a product until it became like the phone for business people to have in the early 2000s. So he made that happen, or helped make that happen at the very least. And so this is all about his rise and fall as well. But Glenn Howerton's performance in this film is just so freaking brilliant. Like, I really just need to give this man his props. I'm a huge fan of It's Always Sunny, okay? I'm a huge fan of that entire cast. They're crazy, they're hilarious. And he's always brilliant in it. But here, he kind of has elements of his It's Always Sunny character in this performance, but it's completely different. I hope that people remember his performance come awards season, especially for like the Golden Globes, for like best comedic performance, because he absolutely knocked it out of the park. Truly, well and truly, one of the best parts of this already really brilliant film. Okay, so next up on the list we have Polite Society. Polite Society is a British action comedy drama film that is centered on this Pakistani British character, a girl who really wants to become a stunt woman, and she has this idol who is a famous stunt woman, and she looks up to her, and that's all she wants to be despite her parents' wishes. And her parents have largely been, supportive of her and her older sister, who is an aspiring artist, but they come across some difficult times, and so they have a lot of doubts as to how they can pursue these careers, these more like creative, out of the box careers, especially as the children of immigrants. And so chaos ensues in various ways. If you haven't seen Polite Society, then I don't want to spoil anything for you, but it was a really wonderful small British film that centered on this Pakistani family, but also had these great comedic and like surrealist aspects to them that just made it really out of the box and different from what we usually see in British comedies. So I really enjoyed Polite Society. It has some really great, outrageous, like tacky, but also fun action sequences. The characters are really great, and the actresses, especially who portrayed the main two sisters, were phenomenal and had great chemistry together. I also really liked the kind of friendship bond or sisterhood bond between the main girl and her two best friends. They were brilliant. I was like, oh, why can't I have best friends like them? Her best friends were everything. If you've watched the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, when it comes to the plot, it's very outlandish, but at the center of it, you have this really endearing and a relatable story of these two girls who are children of immigrants. And in their society, in their polite society, there are certain things that is expected of them, especially as women, in terms of the careers that they pursue, in terms of the relationships that they're pushed to be in. And this is all about them defying that and choosing their own paths. Okay, so speaking of action, although not quite as funny, next up we have a big one that I was actually supposed to do an independent review of, but last week was just a myth. Like, last week was just such a write-off. I'm just waiting for Barbenheimer week, honestly. But that is Mission Impossible. Yes, I watched Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. So if you're curious to hear my thoughts on that film, here they are. I thought it was really great for the most part. Here's the thing, before we begin, let's just rewind a little bit. A few years back, when I watched the first Mission Impossible film that I've ever experienced, and that was Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is still my favorite of all of these Mission Impossible films. Yeah. Absolutely. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol is what I call a perfect film, where from start to finish you're just engaged, you're just enraptured. Like it's perfection. Like it's the perfect version of itself. Like there's no notes that I could give to improve it. Like that's how I feel about Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I love that film. Since then, I became really interested in the Mission Impossible franchise, although I never watched 1 to 3. I never watched 1 to 3, but I was always looking forward to the next one, right? And so I watched, what was the next one? Rogue Nation and Fallout. I watched them in cinemas for the first time. And whilst I was really impressed and enraptured by the action sequences, I mean, Tom Cruise is really out there doing bits when it comes to stunt work. Like, there's literally no one else like him, especially not an A-list actor like him. So I was really impressed by all of that stuff, and it's just like a sight to behold in the cinemas. But when it comes down to it, I think what the other films have lacked that I really loved about Ghost Protocol has been like characters that have just a little bit of personality to them, like characters that just have a little bit of that X factor that just makes them so iconic and so electric. Like we're missing a Paula Patton, we're missing a Jeremy Renner. Like the other characters that have come along since then have been good, especially for the Mission Impossible, world. But I don't know, like there was something about that team dynamic in Ghost Protocol that was just so perfect. And I can't help but think, like, why mess with perfection? It's such a shame that they keep switching them out, especially the female characters. I mean, it's not lost on me, okay, that we have gone on this Mission Impossible journey with Ethan Hunt and Benji and Luther for what, like 30 years now? I swear this franchise is 30 years old, okay? We've gone through this journey with these characters for that long, but in the meantime there have just been so many female characters that have just come into rotation and they've been dropped off, and then another one comes in, they've been dropped off. And yes, we have some repeats like Rebecca Ferguson's character, but if you watch the latest one, spoiler alert, that may no longer be the case. And there's just this feeling of the female characters being really disposable, which I don't love. Now, I do think, when they are on screen, especially in the recent film, in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, they had some phenomenal action sequences. Oh my goodness. Like all of the characters, but especially Hayley Atwell. Hayley Atwell ate this role up. I am so happy for my sister. I am so happy for Peggy Carter, okay? You could tell that she really wanted to just make the most of this opportunity and kill it as this like action female lead, and she knocked it out of the freaking park. To go toe to toe with Tom Cruise, who's on a league of his own, is truly a feat, and she absolutely nailed it. But again, I want to get invested in her character, and I don't want to have this feeling of like, oh, what if they kill her off in the next film, because these female characters have often been treated in such a disposable way. Another thing that's getting old for me when it comes to Mission Impossible is this whole "you've been disavowed" thing. Like, at this point, it would be much more of a shocker if he was avowed. Like, if he was avowed, because he's been disavowed for what, like 20 of the 30 years that he's been around. Like, that's literally all he's known at this point. So I kind of don't know what he's doing anymore and like why he's doing it. I don't understand his motives at this point. I don't understand if he's still associated with the IMF. Like, I don't get it. I really don't understand what the deal is. I think ultimately these films have just become a vessel for Tom Cruise to just be doing crazy stuff on camera, and I'm here for that. Like, I'll definitely pay the ticket to watch that on the big screen. It's definitely worthwhile, but for me, again, just like with John Wick, I need a little bit more substance. I need a little bit more story, a bit more juicy writing to get invested in. Otherwise, it's just like, I mean, if you want to mention Martin Scorsese's whole theme park ride analogy, that's kind of what it feels like with me and a lot of these action movies these days. that lack, you know, story and substance. And I feel a similar way with Extraction 2, by the way. I wasn't going to mention Extraction 2, but since it falls right into this category, I might as well. Extraction 2 was, again, a very good film. And to be fair, I think I'm a little bit more invested in the Extraction verse just because it's newer and like there's still time to give us something. But if by Extraction 3 I'm feeling like we're not going anywhere other than just doing crazy stunts and having these amazing action sequences, then I'm going to start feeling the same way about the Extraction verse that I do about the Mission Impossible verse. And finally, for the good section, oh my god, this has been so long. But like I said, there are actually quite a few good films that I checked out this year so far. But the last one up is one that I watched actually a couple of days ago, and that was Elemental. Yes, Pixar's Elemental, the film that could. I'm really happy to see that Elemental has been, you know, getting quite a bit of box office over the last few weeks internationally. It only came out in the UK on the 7th of July, so that's why I wasn't able to review it on the weekend that it came out in the US. But I would say I'm really happy that I checked it out finally in cinemas, because it really was a wonderful addition to Pixar's roster. This is a film that is centered on, I mean, first of all, just in terms of the world building, you have like this elemental world where you have earth, wind or air, fire and water kind of existing as species. And the main city is like a water metropolis. And it just kind of highlights what it's like to live in a city that seems to be catered to one particular type of person. But then you have these fire people who move into that city and quickly discover how unaccommodating it is for them as immigrants. And so they create their own community. And these two people that create their own community are able to build their own shop where they're able to sell their kind of cultural goods, the stuff from their homeland. And they also have a daughter by the name of Ember, and she's our main protagonist here. And Ember has grown up in her father's shop all her life, and he has promised her that one day when she is ready, she will be taking over for him when he retires. And so that's a huge goal that she has hanging over her head from pretty much when she can understand words. And so she's always been surrounded by, you know, her culture, things from their land, her people, you know, as her parents help build that community for the fire people. It's essentially a really beautiful, if obvious, allegory for immigration, moving into this brand new land that isn't necessarily suited to you. You know, the fire people can't hang out in the water city because it would literally extinguish them. So they have to create a whole new community for themselves. But then soon they see that there are issues with water leakages that are being overlooked by the city council, and so it's up to them to figure out how to solve these issues. But also, you know, Ember learns more about the water city that she's kind of been blocked away from because of her parents' sort of fears and prejudices towards the water people. And so she ends up meeting Wade, who is a waterman, a water person, and they end up falling in love. And honestly, if there was ever a case to be made for the swell, okay, Pixar's Elemental did that. Like, Pixar's Elemental is swell propaganda, and I'm here for it, absolutely. But yeah, it's essentially like an analogy for an interracial relationship. But it's really, really clever and really well done, and I really bought into the romance that formed between these two characters. Like, you buy that they really care about each other, especially Wade towards Ember. He sees something like magical in her, whereas, you know, she is focused on trying to live up to her father's or her parents' expectations of taking over the shop one day and honoring their sacrifices. So I mean, Pixar is in their immigration, sacrifices, generational trauma bag, okay, with this and Turning Red. Like, they really want to explore this topic. But it's a brilliant film, so I highly recommend you check it out if you can in the cinemas, because as per usual, Pixar does its thing when it comes to animating spectacular worlds. If I did have any critiques for Elemental, it would probably be that, you know, coming off of Across the Spider-Verse. There is this sense of like ingenuity and just specialness and like groundbreakingness when it comes to Into the Spider-Verse that's kind of missing from Elemental. Whilst the premise is really strong, really fascinating and engaging and creative for Elemental, it does feel like more of the same from Pixar. Like, it doesn't feel like it's breaking new ground, and the story beats are a little bit predictable. And so I think, you know, Pixar is at a crossroads right now, and people will say it's for all sorts of reasons, like, oh, the gay representation in Lightyear, whatever. But no, in reality, I think it's two things. Me personally, I think first of all, as Bob Iger recently admitted himself, and he's in a big mess himself, okay, but he admitted that it may have been a mistake to drop the Pixar films on Disney Plus without a theatrical release during the pandemic era. So we never got to see Soul or Luca or Turning Red in cinemas, and it definitely damaged the brand because there was this expectation that Pixar films are now streaming films, and I think that's a shame considering the quality of Pixar's work and also how they were arguably regarded as the top animation studio for a while there previously, before the pandemic. So to see how far they have fallen because of that crucial era is really heartbreaking. But also I do think that they need to experiment a little bit more and try and veer away from the Pixar formula, which is tough because it's worked so well for about like 3 decades at this point. And also the content that they're producing isn't bad, like they're all good films. Pixar very rarely misses, but it's just become a little bit predictable, and it kind of has that feeling of like, yeah, we get it, this is a Pixar film, so we know exactly what's going to happen, and there's no shock value anymore. There's nothing that really blows your mind about these films, even though they are very enjoyable and probably some of the best animated films that we're still getting to this day. Okay, so next up, oh my goodness, I spent so long talking about the good that we have to race through the bad, which is okay, because for all of the bad, I have independent reviews for them, so you can check out my thoughts if you want to hear more about these awful films, in my opinion. And we're starting off with a film that's not the end of the world. Like, it's not the end of the world, but it's not good. Like, it was a disappointment, honestly. And that was Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Nah. No, absolutely not. Marvel's gonna have to do much better than that if it wants to beat the superhero fatigue allegations, because this film, cataclysmic, catastrophic, honestly, like, it did real damage to the MCU. I generally think that if it wasn't for Quantumania, there's a chance that Guardians 3 could have reached 1 billion. Like, I think there's a chance. Honestly, I genuinely think that there is a chance. But Quantumania did some real damage to the MCU brand. I mean, Disney is just swimming in problems at the moment. And so, yeah, it was just an unforgivable error for a lot of people. And I think they were put off of exploring other MCU stories earlier this year, which is a huge shame because Guardians 3 was just miles above whatever this was. And now we have the very real problem of Jonathan Majors as Kang, who was the bright light in Quantumania, and now he's become quite an issue for the franchise. I have no idea what they're going to do in this case. Certainly not for Loki season 2, where he's also featured. Definitely not for Kang Dynasty. Like, I don't know what's going to go on. Like, But honestly, as great as Jonathan Majors was in the film, I still think that it was the wrong film to introduce Kang in the first place. And so, yeah, I think Marvel put themselves in this pickle for no goddamn reason, because the film didn't even end up being that great. And then next up on this bad list, we have Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Remember that? Yes, that did in fact come out this year. Just another stinky flop-arena, like, just so bad. And again, like, I don't hate Shazam. I don't think it's like a terrible film. but it was just like a lot of missed potential, especially with like the Greco-Roman goddess sisters, where it felt like the film really could have been about them, you know, on their own. We didn't really need Shazam at times. And then for a Shazam sequel, it was odd that Black Adam wasn't there. So like The Rock really just threw a wrench in both of those franchises. Yeah, it was just like, it wasn't good. You know, it wasn't great. The CG though, and the special effects were decent, which is more than what I can say for some other films, which we'll talk about in a second. And a lot of the cast were really good. I did not like Zachary Levi's performance as Shazam this time around. I think it made no sense that he was acting younger and even less mature than Billy Batson himself. Like that, it was just very confusing and it made no sense. But like I said, I dive into this in my review, so yeah, all I'll say is that was just a big chop from me. And again, it did not help DC beat the superhero fatigue allegations. Like these mid/bad films just make matters worse when it comes to the impending downfall of the superhero genre. Speaking of impending downfall of superhero genre, The Flash, The Flash, oh, but you know what? I had such a good time talking about The Flash. But I can't even be mad at it. Like, I had a good time ranting about that disaster of a film. And honestly, like, I told you guys it was bad. Some people didn't believe me. Some people were like, oh, you're only saying that because of Ezra Miller, or you're only saying that because of DC. But some of you guys watched it for yourselves and you were like, Jean, you were too kind. And I'm like, yeah. I told you, like, the lies had to stop. The lies had to stop. I noticed how the lies stopped after opening weekend. Did you notice how, like, all of those people that were like, oh, The Flash is the best film ever. Oh, it's the best film since The Dark Knight. Oh, Tom Cruise was like, oh, we need this film right now. Notice how all of those lies stopped after opening weekend. Certainly after the second weekend, where there was a 73% drop. Notice how everything just became hush, just became quiet. I thought you were all passionate about The Flash. What happened to that passion? It went down the drain, just like the money spent on this film. Like I said, I can't even be mad because, like, it was just funny. Like, to me, it was just a funny experience. What a terrible film. And awful CG. Awful CG. I will never believe anyone who tries to look me in the eye and say that, oh, you know, CGI doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the CG is bad because at least the story is good. No. First of all, the story wasn't good. And secondly, that CG, that level of terrible CG is entirely unforgivable regardless of the circumstances. And lastly, when it comes to the bad, okay, that 2023 has had to offer so far, we have Ghosted. Yeah, that was also this year. Apple TV Plus's Ghosted, starring Ana de Armas and Chris Evans. A big no from me. A big no from me. Although, again, I had fun ranting about that film too, so I can't be too mad. Okay, so next up we have the mid, and I have just a few films in this category. I have a few more, but the others aren't even worth mentioning. But first one up, we have No Hard Feelings. This is a Jennifer Lawrence movie that I reviewed a couple of weeks back, and it's, you know, one of the first sort of early 2000s style raunchy R-rated comedies that we have seen be theatrically released in a long time, and so people are really excited about that. I thought the film was relatively enjoyable. I thought it definitely had some like funny moments. Jennifer Lawrence fully committed to the role, and that was great to see. It made it even more funny, and also her, you know, chemistry with the lead actor, I can't remember his name, but they were great together, and again, they just had some really great moments in the film. But I would say when it comes to, you know, these styles of raunchy comedies from the early 2000s, as I mentioned in that video, I don't miss them quite as much as some people do. I'm okay with them going to streaming. I felt like it was definitely a streaming movie in my opinion. So I think I would have gotten the same, if not an even better experience just watching it on Netflix or any other streaming service as opposed to watching it theatrically. Next up, we have the biggest animated film of the year so far, and what will probably be one of the biggest films of the year overall, and that is Super Mario Bros. This was giving very mid for me. This was giving, what I I would do to swap Super Mario's box office with Spider-Verse's, like what I would do, like this, I get it, like Super Mario is a huge brand. I'm not surprised that it was so popular and so successful, and also kids loved this film, and it's, you know, for kids primarily, and there are a ton of Easter eggs to the games, and all of the Super Mario lore. Like, I'm not surprised that it did so well, and I did enjoy it in part, but to think that it made like $1.3 billion, like, I don't know, I'm salty, like, forgive me, but I'm salty, okay, like, that's kind of hurtful to me, because the film is so run-of-the-mill, like, it's nothing particularly special. Listen, I don't want to get hated on by the Super Mario fans, but yeah, the film is not giving special, it's not giving unique, but it does have a very powerful IP, and so I guess I just have to hand it to them. Like, congrats Nintendo, congrats Universal, you really did that. I will say though, even though I didn't really care about this film, like, for the most part, my one concern was the casting of Chris Pratt as Mario himself, and of course, you know, we were all lamenting on the lack of the Italian accent, whether it's offensive or not, it remains to be seen, but I will say, you know, after watching the film, I think within like 20-30 minutes, I was kind of in the groove. Like, I was kind of okay with it. I got used to it, and I was like, you know what, okay, yes, we could have gotten the stereotypical Italian accent, sure, but I think this works as well, having them be these New Yorkers who are just trying their best to get their, you know, plumbing company up and running. Yeah, I think that worked pretty well. And also the ad that they had at the beginning when they did have the stereotypical accents was really funny. Also the casting of Charlie Day as Luigi, another It's Always Sunny alumni, but the casting of Charlie Day as Luigi was a stroke of genius, period. And Jack Black, phenomenal. You know what, maybe I did enjoy this. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it. It wasn't anything special. Like, it just, and the fact that it made $1.3 billion is kind of baffling. And finally, speaking of major films that came out this year that I just personally did not get the hype for, lastly we have Megan. Yes, I was finally persuaded to watch Megan after seeing all of the great advertising and the dance becoming viral, people dressing up like the character, including Jason Blum himself. Like, it was such a huge deal in January of 2023, and it took me several months to finally check it out because, as many of you guys will know, I'm a scaredy cat. I'm scared, I'm terrified, so I don't like horror films. But Megan isn't scary. She's essentially just this like robot who comes to life, who gains consciousness, and sees it as her mission to protect this little girl who happens to be the niece of the scientists who created her. And, you know, that little girl is going through a tough time. She loses both of her parents at the beginning of the film, and she's like really upset and alone, and so Megan is there to be her friend, and they develop this really strong bond. And yeah, it's a really great story about friendship in some ways, but also because Megan is a product, she is also being sold as a toy for mass market somehow. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense how this toy would be for mass market, although we're living in the age of AI, so like anything could happen, literally anything could happen. Let me not even say anything, but yeah, they have this like conflict between this really personal sort of robot who is catered to this little girl, who is dedicated to her and will protect her by any means necessary, versus the flip side, the commercial side, where the company who helped create her want to see profits. You know, they want the money that they could get from advertising this as a mass market toy. And so you have those two conflicting things kind of coming to a head in the third act of this film in a rather spectacular, hilarious way. But for the most part, I would say the film was like, it was fine. Like, again, it didn't like blow my mind or anything. It wasn't too groundbreaking. I would say that the marketing for this film was just so much stronger than the film itself, that even though it definitely got butts in seats and people definitely streamed it online, it kind of did a disservice to the film in the sense that like it set up my expectations really high, and when I watched it I was like, oh, okay, that's yeah. And also, just judging off of the marketing, you'd think that the dance sequence, the iconic Megan dance sequence, was way longer than it actually was in the film. Like, you would think it was like a whole hour. You would think you would think it was like a central piece to this film, but in reality it's literally like 2 seconds. But that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys all of the good, the bad and the meh of most of the films that I've checked out in 2023 so far, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of these films and what other films you've checked out this year so far down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up, including the TV show version of this video, and of course Barbenheimer. My Barbenheimer reviews, which will be dropping next week. I probably won't be able to drop them in the weekend because I'm gonna go see it as like an occasion with my family, and like I'm just gonna have a good time, so I won't have time to edit and film and all of that, but don't worry, there will be up. There will be up. We will have such a good time. I've already planned my outfit, my makeup. Oh, this is what I've been waiting for all year. Until then, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.